So I'm going to read you this. This is the 39 Steps. It's a 1915 text by a guy called John Buchan. John Buchan was actually, I think he was very high up anyway, I think he worked in the embassy or the consulate or something in Canada. He was very high up and he wrote books in his spare time. So what he actually was doing was he knows what he's talking about basically. And in 1915 he wrote this book. And this is an extract from it. In this extract, the narrator, Richard Hannay, is on the run from a gang of spies after escaping from a locked room in their farmhouse by using some explosive devices that he found there. So this is pure action adventure, isn't it? Unable to travel away from the farm in daylight, he has now found a hiding place on top of a dovecot. A dovecot is a little house where doves live, actually. A dovecot, which he needs to climb in spite of having been injured in the explosion. So basically, he's been injured in the explosion and he's hiding in the dovecot, which is a little house where doves go. So it's not a nice place to be, is it? So if you read this passage together, we're going to read it. There's a picture of one of the original covers, basically. And you can see that it's an action adventure because they've got a picture of a man in a suit. In action adventure, like James Bond, they often wear suits, don't they? Or smart people running away from something across big countryside. So let me just read you the rest of it. That was one of the hardest jobs I ever took on. My shoulder and arm ached like hell. And I was so sick and giddy that I was on the verge of falling, but I managed it somehow by the use of out-jutting stones and gaps in the masonry and a tough ivy root. I got to the top in the end. So here he is being strong and masculine, climbing up. There was a little parapet behind which I found space to lie down. A parapet is sort of like on castles on the edge of buildings. It's an edging. So it's an edging around big buildings. There was a little parapet behind which I found space to lie down. Then I proceeded to go off into an old-fashioned swoon. So he collapses, basically. I woke with a burning head and the sun glaring in my face. So that's lovely imagery, isn't it? A burning head and the sun glaring in my face. For a long time I lay motionless, for those horrible fumes seemed to have loosened my joints and dulled my brain. So horrible fumes, that's sense description, isn't it? Sounds came to me from the house. Again, sound. Men speaking throatily in the throbbing of a stationary car. There was a little gap in the parapet to which I wiggled and from which I had some sort of prospect of the yard. Full stop. I saw figures come out, dash, a servant with his head bound up, comma, and then a younger man in knickerbockers. Those are sort of long trousers down to the knee that are slightly baggy. That tells us he's probably in Scotland. In Scotland, they wear knickerbockers. They were looking for something and moved towards the mill. Then one of them caught sight of the wisp of cloth, that's a little bit of cloth on the nail, and cried out to the other. So that he's being chased and he's hiding, isn't he? Classic action adventure, isn't it?
Yeah.
Then one of them caught sight of the wisp of cloth on the nail and cried out to the other. They both went back to the house and brought two more to look at it. So yeah, he's being chased by lots of people. Classic action adventure. I saw the rotund figure of my late captor and I thought I made out the man with the lisp. So the rotund means fat, round. I thought I made out the fat, round figure of my late captor. So he's obviously been in captivity again, classic, being captured. I thought I made it the man with the lisp. I noticed that all had pistols, so guns, violence. That's a classic ingredient of action adventure. So that's the action bit. For half an hour they ransacked the mill. I could hear them kicking over the barrels and pulling up the rotten planking. Then they came outside and stood just below the dovecot, arguing fiercely. The servant with the bandage was being soundly rated. I heard them fiddling with the door of the dovecot, and for one horrid moment I fancied they were coming up. Then they thought better of it and went back to the house. So it's a near miss here, again, an ingredient of action adventure. But what's important about this is how beautifully written it is. It is action adventure, but it's got some lovely descriptive language. It uses all ingredients of my recipe, which are, of course, beautiful adjectives, rule of three, sense description, complex compound sentences, long sentences and short sentences, all mixed up, and lots of emotive language. So it's a very good piece in that, you get involved with it, get engaged, and it's all down to the beautifully written language. All that long blistering afternoon. So again, blistering shows how hot it is. And alliteration here, blistering afternoon, I lay baking on the rooftop. So alliteration, again, an ingredient of my recipe, if you remember the 17 points in my other video. Thirst was my chief torment, full stop. Nice short sentence, underlines how thirsty he is. My tongue was like a stick. And again, so this is feelings now. And we're going to get inside his head, how this is the narrator, this point of view feeling, this I. How is this person feeling? We're there with him on the rooftop. My tongue was like a stick, and to make it worse, I could hear the cool drip of water from the mill aid. I suppose that's the mill. I watched the course of the little stream as it came in from the moor, and my fancy followed it to the top of the glen, where it must issue from an icy fountain fringed with cool ferns and mosses. Okay, so that's beautiful description, isn't it? Cool ferns and mosses, icy fountain. So it's the juxtaposition, it's the contrast between I lay baking on the rooftop and where his imagination's taking him. So he's in Scotland, basically. And that's why you get glens in Scotland and moors in Scotland, and that's where he is, and ferns and mosses. So lovely sense of descriptive language there. I would have given £1,000 to plunge my face into that. So there's actually a picture underneath of 39 Steps of him clearly hiding in a suit on a moor, isn't he? That's another copy from another edition. It's a very famous book, by the way. It's even been made into a film. So I had a fine prospect of the whole ring of moorland. I saw the car speed away with 2 occupants and a man on a hill pony riding east. I judged they were looking for me, and I wished them joy of their quest. This was written in 1915, so it's got some quite beautifully phrased language, and see that I wish them joy of their quest. We don't really write like that anymore.
Yeah, because when I click on it, it says that you should put the.
Yes, because they don't really understand Microsoft Word or whatever, Google Docs. They don't understand unusual creative writing, and this is what that is. So often these corrections are a bit mainstream, and you can't always trust them. I judge they're looking for, I wish them joy of their quest. That's sort of a bit poetic, actually, isn't it? And it's, we understand what he's saying. But I saw something else more interesting. That's a nice short sentence. The house stood almost on the summit of a swell of a moorland which crowned a sort of plateau, and there was no higher point nearer than the big hills 6 miles off. The actual summit, as I have mentioned, was a biggish clump of trees, firs mostly, with a few ashes and beeches. On the Dovecote, I was almost on a level with the treetops, and I could see what lay beyond. The wood was not solid, but only a ring, and inside was an oval of green turf, for all the world like a big cricket field. So he can see a secret landing place, can't he? And in action adventure, you always have secrets. And so, that's the secret landing place.
Please, can I go to the toilet?
Yeah. I didn't take long to guess what it was. It was an aerodrome, and a secret one. The place had been most cunningly chosen, for suppose anyone were watching an aeroplane descending here, he would think it had gone over the hill beyond the trees. As the place was on top of a rise in the midst of a big amphitheatre, any observer from any direction would conclude it had passed out of view behind the hill. Only a man very close at hand would realise that the aeroplane had not gone over, but descended in the midst of the wood. An observer with a telescope on one of the higher trees might have discovered the truth, but only herds went there, and herds do not carry spyglasses. When I looked from the Dovecote, I could see far away a blue line which I knew was the sea, and I grew furious to think that our enemies had this secret conning tower to rake our waterways. So this is good versus bad, isn't it? And rake means to scan, to look, to scoop up. Then I reflected that if that aeroplane came back, the chances were 10 to 1 that I'd be discovered. So through the afternoon, I lay and prayed for the coming of darkness. And glad I was when the sun went down over the big western hills and the twilight haze crept over the moor. So that's lovely descriptive language again, isn't it? So we can see exactly where he is. The aeroplane was late. Okay, nice short sentence. The gloaming was far advanced when I heard the beat of wings and saw it vol-planing downward to its home in the wood. Gloaming means, I think, the dusk, the darkness. Lights twinkled for a bit, and there was much coming and going from the house. Then the dark fell, and silence. Thank God it was a black night. The moon was well on its last quarter and would not rise till late. My thirst was too great to allow me to tarry, so about 9 o'clock, so far as I could judge, I started to descend. It wasn't easy. I'm going to just put that back there. Hang on. So my thirst was too great to allow me to tarry. So about 9 o'clock, so far as I could judge, I started to descend. So look at these lovely complex, compounding, simple sentences all mixed to make it easy. It wasn't make it interesting. It wasn't easy. And halfway down, I heard the back door of the house open and saw the gleam of a lantern against the mill wall. For some agonizing minutes, I hung by the ivy and prayed that whoever it was would not come round by the dovecot. So it's got lots of adventure and suspense, hasn't it? Then the light disappeared and I stopped as softly as I could onto the hard soil of the yard. You can get this book free on Project Gutenberg. It's great. I like this book a lot, actually. I read it in one night. It's a true action adventure. I crawled on my belly in the lee of a stone dyke till I reached the fringe of trees which surrounded the house. If I had known how to do it, I would have tried to put that aeroplane out of action, but I realised that any attempt would probably be futile, i.e. useless. I was pretty certain there would be some kind of defence round the house. So I went through the wood on hands and knees, feeling carefully every inch before me. It was as well, for presently I came on a wire about 2 feet from the ground. If I had tripped over that, it would doubtless have rung some bell in the house and I would have been captured. So he's being chased, isn't he?
Yeah.
And they've even put wires there. So it's obviously, a very complex, sophisticated gang, very James Bond. I think it's written before James Bond, though. I think James Bond may have copied this. 100 yards further on, I found another wire cunningly placed on the edge of a small stream. Beyond that lay the moor, and in 5 minutes I was deep in bracken and heather. So he's escaped. Impressive. Soon I was round the shoulder of the rise in the little glen from which the mill lade flowed. 10 minutes later, my face was in the spring, and I was soaking down pints of the blessed water. What do you think a glen is? But I did not stop till I had put 6 miles between me and that accursed dwelling. What do you think a glen is?
I have no idea.
Well, you could Google it then.
Glen.
You'll see beautiful pictures of a Scottish landscape, because a glen is a Scottish word. So Google it and see what a glen is. What does it say?
A narrow valley, especially in Scotland or Ireland.
Okay, get an image and paste it in then for me.
Okay.
There's lots of glens in this text because he flees from London, actually, where he sees a murder. He flees from London, Kensington, I think, all the way to Scotland on a train. And there's lots and lots of chases in this book, tons of chases. This is just one of the many narrow escapes he has. It is beautifully written. So have you put me a picture of a glen in there?
I'm doing it. Is it in the 39 steps from the live stream?
Put it on the 39 steps action adventure lesson, yeah. Put it where we are now.
I'm going to put it after the class A thing.
Oh no, put it in where we are now, where it says Glen next to it. Put it up here.
I can't see.
Soon I was round the shoulder of that rise in the little glen from which the mill laid flow. Put it there. So it describes the countryside very beautifully, basically, in this, so we can see where we are. Other descriptions are a fringe of trees which surrounded the house, Oh, and the description of when he's really, really thirsty back here, wasn't it? When he's laying there. My fancy followed to the top of the glen where it must issue from an icy fountain fringed with cool ferns and mosses. So we've got this whole idea of him laying on a hot Scottish afternoon and being tortured by the heat and thinking of water as people are trying to find him. With lots of beautiful language. Adjectives, long, blistering, and that's actually quite emotive. So let's just go back down the page. Have you put Glenn in yet? Oh, is that a picture of a Glen? Okay. All right then. So, yeah, I think, yeah. Okay, so Glen is a Scottish word, and it means sort of an area with beautiful trees and where a stream comes from, basically, emanates from, I think. Anyway, let's just carry on. So you've got him. There's a picture there of him jumping out of the train, actually, that I put in. Right. So the questions. We've got some questions here. So the adventure story genre has many recognisable features, as we talked about Class A by Robert Muchamore and his whole series, and we talked about a list of the details that the author provides. Basically, and so we can see that basically a lot of this is a typical scene. The injured hero hides as the villains search for him.
What's my crap?
So your homework is to do answer these details. So identify 3 narrow escapes that the narrator has before the end of the passage.
Which one?
Here it is. I'll highlight it. Which other? So identify 3.
Which one is it? The 39 steps.
Yes. Identify 3 narrow escapes that the narrator has before the end of the passage. How does the account suggest that he's smarter than his enemies? That's one question.
Okay.
You see, there we are. 1. Identify 3 narrow that the narrator has before the end of the passage. So go on, have a little go at that now. Question 2. Hiding in the full glare of the sun, Hannah is tantalised by the near presence of cool water. Where's that gone? He cannot reach. Explore the language that the writers used to make the water seem all the more desirable. So we talked about that, didn't we?
I don't see where the questions are.
They're on page 11.
11? Is it saying question 1, identify 3 narrow?
Yes, that's right. Identify 3 narrow escapes that the narrator has before the end of this passage. Number 2, hiding in the full glare of the sun. Hannah is tantalised by the presence of cool water. How does the description appeal to our senses? So that's really important. Part of my recipe, isn't it? The use of the senses in there. I talked about that as we were going through it. And we talked about the alliteration, baking, blistering, emotive language, adjectival language. He might use a rule of 3. He certainly uses sense. And number 3, how does the final sentence of this passage close the episode and end the chapter satisfactory for the reader? So let's just have a look at that final question. How does the final sentence of this Oh, but I did not stop until I had put half a dozen miles between me and that accursed dwelling. So what we've got there is a lovely idea that he's escaped, hasn't he? What does accursed mean?
Accursed, accursed means, in what context?
There. I did not stop until I'd put half a dozen miles between me and that accursed dwelling. It means cursed, bad, basically. It's a bad, negative place for him. Okay, so for him...
I'll answer these questions, okay.
Did you actually? Okay, so that's good. So do it. Do you think you can do it? Because I've talked you through. Now listen, as I was talking, I made a video for you, so you can actually listen to me giving you almost all the answers.
I cannot see a video.
I know. I'm going to make it for you in a minute.
Can you send it on the stream?
I'll email it to you. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, but just so before we go, let's just think a little bit briefly about the final, the third, this question 2. Hiding in the full glare of the sun. No, hang on. Question 1. Identify 3 narrow escapes that the narrator has. So basically, what are the 3 narrow escapes, do you think? Just to say, to talk about it.
Let me go back to start. When he's on the run, he's locked in a farmhouse. He somehow escapes.
I think one of the ones is basically when the men are down, when the people are all at the bottom of the dovecot and they try and open the door. That's one, isn't it? Yeah. Another time basically could be when he almost trips over one of the wires in the ground, but he's clever enough to crawl along. Yeah.
Yeah, but I don't see why the thing with the dovecot and the door being locked.
Well, yeah, because it's a narrow escape, because they could have decided to unlock the door and go upstairs, but luckily they just left it. Yeah?
Okay. And the third one is going to be...
Well, at some point he's hanging, isn't he, by the ivy, and someone goes out on it when he's climbing down. So you can find that bit. For some agonising minutes I hung by the ivy and prayed that whoever it was would not come round by the dovecot. Then the light disappeared and I dropped as softly as I could onto the hard soil of the yard. All right, so this was actually produced by AQA, an exam board for the GCSEs to give you practice in writing analysing and seeing all sorts of very, very brilliant texts. So I hope you enjoyed it. Did you enjoy it? Yeah, it's a good action adventure, isn't it? I think, and he copied, Fleming, who wrote James Bond, copied him clearly, and all action adventures have copied lots of ingredients from this. You can read it for free on Project Gutenberg if you want. All right then, so